The recent historic general election on May 9 illustrated the concern of Malaysians about correcting the trajectory of the country. Malaysians voted for a new government that holds out the promise of national reforms. With this, I'm honored to invite our notable speakers, Yang Berbahagia Datuk Mah Weng Kwai, retired Court of Appeal Judge, Yang Berusaha Dr. Azmi Shahrum, Deputy Chairman, Election Commission of Malaysia, Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Setia Haji Amrin bin Buang, former Auditor General of Malaysia, and our moderator, Dr. Cheong Kee Chok, to take a seat on stage. Please welcome.
Good morning. Now that we are truly warmed up on governance, we are now into the second session. I do not need to introduce the speakers here, but Dato' Ma is one of the speakers. Dr. Azmi Shahrum needs no introduction, and of course, Tan Sri Amrin. And they will speak to you on regulation, and rather than me butt in, I will let them do the speaking.
A very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, all the honorable speakers, Mr. Moderator, participants, and everyone in this room who is so keen to know about reforms in this beloved country of ours. Now, I was invited to talk on this very interesting topic on reform in regulatory system, and I'm very grateful to the previous speakers for having laid the groundwork on what good governance is, or what better governance should be, and what is rule of law or rule by law. And I think you have a fairly good idea of what the background of this topic is. So what I want to do is to drill down into some specifics and throw some ideas and some proposals and see whether you will agree with them or whether you have some other better proposals. Now, speaking from largely a very judicial perspective, having retired from the courts a few years ago, and well, that's what they say about retirement age. Judges retire at 66. That's reaching the statutory age of senility. And anyhow, but there's still, and I'm sure the more senior members here, senior delegates here will agree with me, there's a lot left after retirement. Now, the challenges have obviously been discussed over a period of time, and right after GE14, you recall, there was the formation of the CEP, Council of Eminent Persons, and after the CEP formed the IRC, Institutional Reforms Committee. I was one of the members, and there were many suggestions and proposals that were discussed. I'll share some with you, and let's see what your opinion is. Now, I start off with a quote on the independence of the judiciary, and you'll see that by and large, this makes a lot of sense. It's very applicable today. This was a quote which I've taken from the Lord President Saleh Abbas in the case of Lim Kit Siang against then Datuk Sri Dr. Mahathir. When we speak of government, it must be remembered that this comprises three branches, namely the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary. The courts have a constitutional function to perform, and they are the guardian of the Constitution within the terms and structure of the Constitution itself. They not only have the power of construction and interpretation of legislation, but also the power of judicial review, a concept that pumps through the arteries of every constitutional education and which does not imply the superiority of judges over legislators, but of the Constitution over both. Now, I think this is a concept which the lawyers amongst us here would fully agree with me, that we are in fact talking about constitutional supremacy, not parliamentary supremacy, because the Constitution is the foundation of law in our country. Now, I would like to go into specifics straight away, so that otherwise I might run out of time. And these are some suggestions. The reforms to restore the independence of the judiciary. Now, you have heard over the years that the independence of the judiciary has been eroded. Judges become very compliant. politicians are somewhere at the back telling judges what to do and so on. Some of it may be true, some largely not quite true. But what was true is that we had Article 121 of the Federal Constitution with the amendments, and we realized that, look, judicial power didn't really vest in the courts until we had this case, very recent case, 2017, Semenyih Jaya against Pentadbir Tanah Daerah, and Justice Tan Sri Zainul Ali, she chaired the Federal Court panel, and she came out with this brilliant decision to say that, look, the bastion of judicial power rests with the courts, not with the Parliament. So what I'm suggesting here is to look to the future. You will not get it straight away because it needs an amendment of the Federal Constitution. You need 2/3 majority, quite obviously, and that is to expressly vest judicial powers of the Federation back with the courts. Now, why do we need this amendment? We already have this case of Semenyih Jaya. The risk here is this: you have one panel deciding today in one way. Tomorrow, you may have another panel for a variety of reasons and can come to a completely opposite decision. So we really need the reform and have this embedded in the Constitution. Then the power to have judicial review. Now this is important, and as also stated in that case of Lim Kit Siang, judicial power to review is fundamental because you can't have administrators making decisions and then there's no check and balance. There are 42 clauses in our laws, known as the ouster clauses, which does not allow parties to go to court for review. So this is one area which I think there should be a total revamp, and to cut down the number of such ouster clauses. In fact, you have ouster clauses ranging from Widows and Pensions Act right up to the Prevention of Terrorism Act. Yeah, so a whole spectrum of the law. Next, I talk about the judicial appointment system. Now, you do realize that we do have the JAC, Judicial Appointments Commission. There was some talk previously that judges should be appointed by Parliament, by politicians. Lo and behold, I hope this will never happen, because it has to be by people who know the judges and the people who know the kind of candidates that you want to be appointed. But I think what is important is they should go through the parliamentary process to have this parliamentary select committee to appoint the commissioners on JAC, right? So there's a big difference. Appointment of the commissioners onto the JAC so that they can exercise the powers of selection and promotion and so on, right? And not the other way around of getting parliament or politicians to appoint judges. This is something which we should look forward to have collegiate and self-governing judiciary rather than a command and control system. And I think this has been put in place, and I think you recall the previous Chief Justice, Tan Sri Richard, has actually put this in place where decisions are not made just by one person, but by the top office bearers of the judiciary, namely the 4 top officers. So it's more collegiate in the system. Public complaints. Yes, we do have complaints coming to the judges, but this has to be more structured. And of course, what about complaints by judges themselves? And I think you're all fully aware of the case that we were told by, the complaints that we were told by Justice Hamid Sultan, and we're all waiting with bated breath as to what's going to happen with the RCI. Do you recall this? There was this 65-page affidavit which Justice Hamid, who is a sitting judge in the Court of Appeal, he had a whole list of complaints and allegations, and there was an announcement that the RCI would be formed, but until today, it's all gone quiet. We do not know what the terms of the RCI will be or who are the persons that will be sitting in the commission. If I may go on to the next, which is separation of judicial and legal services. Now, this may seem a small point, but I think in practice it is important. Because right now we have a judicial and legal services together. It's one commission, combined services. And the effect of this is that officers are intertransferable from the judicial and the legal service. And now, whether or not this is in fact a good idea, well, they'll say it has worked for so many years. But personally, I think that there should be a separation. Have the Attorney General to head the legal service, and he becomes solely focused on advising the government. He attends cabinet meetings, he can attend parliament by invitation and so on, but his job is purely as an advisor to the government. Then we would have a separate division for the public prosecutor, where his job is purely to prosecute. Yeah? You can call the office of public prosecutor or director of public prosecutions and so on. And he will be totally independent of the service. Independent of the Attorney General. And he will be chosen by a select committee, and he will be a member of the Legal Services Commission and of the Parliament's Board, fixed term and fixed terms of contract for removal and so on. Then we will have essentially 3 commissions, which will be one for the Attorney General's Commission, which is the legal service officers in the AGC, 2, the public prosecution, and then thirdly, one service for the judicial officers. When we talk about judicial officers, it's referring to the subordinate courts, which is the magistrates and the sessions courts. Yeah? Because judges and the judges of the High Court, the Court of Appeal, and the Federal Court, they're all appointed by the JAC. The JAC does not appoint magistrates and sessions court judges and registrars because they are part of the civil service. I move on to the police. Now, this is all very topical, and IPMC is one of the points. Now, you recall there was this commission that was heard almost 10 years ago, and the recommendations of the IPCMC of the commission was to establish IPMC, and this has over the years come up with I would almost say resistance from the police themselves. But I think of late it's been encouraging to hear that the police actually have no objections to this, and I think this is it makes a lot of sense because this is for misconduct and discipline of police force. So if there's really nothing wrong with any particular officer, I don't see what the worry is. The purpose of this commission is not to curb or to restrict the powers of the police in the investigations, enforcement, and so on. It is purely for discipline purposes. What is also important, as far as the general public is concerned, is always to know what are the Inspector General's standing orders. What are the standard operating procedures? We are told that, oh, this is standard police work. But what is that? We don't get to know. And I think publication of these orders and procedures would be very useful. The other is the use of the remand power. In fact, this what comes to mind is that you read the papers, you watch TV, you'll find out people, when they are being remanded, they are brought to court. And what are they wearing? They're wearing that orange jumpsuit uniform that's being provided to the police. And the question is, are these jumpsuits, this bright orange uniform, is it gazetted? Is it allowed? Or what? And this seems to be a fairly gray area, and I've not been able to find the answer, whether they are actually allowed by law for the police officers to insist that people who are coming for remand to wear this orange uniform. After all, they are only suspects. They have not even been charged. They have been arrested. They are suspected of offense. They are brought to court for a remand order, which is to detain them further, right? So I think the stigma of somebody having to wear this uniform is quite obvious. I will, just on point 6, I think this is also important, to provide for National Police Human Rights Code, human rights training. In other words, the police officers themselves must be made aware of what the criteria are for human rights, what are the standards, so that they can observe it. We often hear about deaths in police custody, right? In persons who die in remand in the lockup. Then the answer always that we get is, oh, it's caused by a natural death, or somebody had a stroke or a heart attack and so on. But very often, the people who are who die in lockup are actually victims of abuse, victims of assault. So this definitely, one death in the custody of the police is one death too many. Immigration, a quick word about this. Now, I just made a note here to have an express power to blacklist persons from leaving the country in circumstances limited by law. You will do recall that after the GE14, various people were trying to leave the country and then they were blacklisted, not allowed to leave the country and so on. But here, the law is not that clear, and I think there should be very express powers as to when the government can or cannot restrict people from leaving the country. The Section 59 is the one that which I mentioned just now about ouster clause. Now, under the Immigration Act, you can't bring a matter to court once the minister has made a decision. Moving on, let me just touch very quickly on Parliament. We have had the parliamentary committees of Malaysia formed, and then, of course, this came right up to the head very recently with the appointment of the Commissioner for MACC. So on one hand, the question was, did the Prime Minister have the power to appoint Puan Latifah as the head of MACC without going to this select committee? Now, on the other hand, it says, oh, it was a promise of the Pakatan Harapan government. The manifesto said that you will have the PSCs formed, and in fact, you have MP William Leong sitting in this committee, but he was not consulted. So this whole debate of, firstly, whether it was correct, legally correct, and secondly, whether it was something that should have been done. Now, my view, of course, is that while the legal power might be there, but since the expectations of the public is that this should be run to the PSC, and you already have the PSC in place, then the question is, why wasn't that done? Also, under parliamentary reforms, and this is really going down to specifics, will be to have bipartisan parliamentary committees to examine bills, and after the second reading, as is permitted by the Parliament standing orders. Now, as far as bills are concerned, I think this is, again, something which affects each and every one of us. Very often, we will pick up the papers, and then they'll find that, oh, Parliament is going to sit, and you will have this bill that's going to be table, whereas nobody seems to know what's in the bill. Bar Council has always been asking for bills to be given on a confidential basis for review and scrutiny and so on, but that doesn't happen. So Hakam has been asking this for years and years. Let us have a look at bills so that we can have an input. It doesn't happen. So who gets to look at bills? Not even the members of Parliament, I think. And more often than not, they will get it, well, maybe a few days or just a day itself. So something has to be done here. Otherwise, when you go into a debate on the bills, I think it becomes meaningless, where people do not have a full understanding of what the bill comprises of. Maybe I'm going a little ahead of time because I am talking about a shadow cabinet. I'm not sure whether this will ever happen in Malaysia. But this is so to ensure that we do have people who are up to scratch on every aspect of governance. Reforming the Senate, perhaps that's also something that can be looked into, to have direct elections, perhaps to increase the number of senators from 2 to 3 for each state, and maybe to abolish or to decrease the number of appointed members of the Senate. Next one, anti-corruption. I think this is something which is so topical and so interesting. I don't think I need to spend much more time. If you've been reading the papers, you've been reading the articles and social media, you know where we are at this juncture. But just that one proposal, one suggestion is perhaps point number one, and that is to set up a new independent anti-corruption commission, IACC, under Part 10 of the Constitution, and then to have the commissioners appointed by the PSC, and to place the ACA under this commission. So it becomes even a bigger umbrella body. Okay, whether this is going to happen, we will have to wait and see. But at the same time, number 6 and 7 deals with the Whistleblowers Protection Act and the Witness Protection Program. These two acts, we have it in our books, but the usage of these two acts is very limited, and if you want people to come forward and tell you what wrongdoings have been, then I think the Whistleblowers Protection Act has to be strengthened, and not just disclosure through other enforcement agencies and so on. It should be the people who can whistleblow and who should be protected should be enlarged. Next is Freedom of Information Act. Again, here we do have 2 states that have Freedom of Information Act, that's Penang and Selangor. But I think it's about time that we have this enacted nationally, to have a federal law on Freedom of Information Act, and at the same time then to amend the Official Secrets Act to be compatible with the Freedom of Information Act. So moving on, next topic is elections. I will defer and skip through this because Prof. Azmi, of course, will be talking to us more on that. So I will bypass that those 2 slides and go on to human rights laws and institutions. I was a member of SOHACAM, and do you know that right now SOHACAM is without a chairman and without commissioners? How did this happen? There's nobody. We only have a secretariat of 80 people, run now by a chief officer, but nobody else is there, simply because the term of all the commissioners lapsed or expired on the 25th of April 2 months ago. And for good measure, the chairman threw in his letter of resignation 2 weeks before the 25th of April. So he was gone. And of the 8 commissioners, 2 would not be extended because they've served the full 6 years, maximum 6 years, 2 terms of 3 years. But there were 5 others who were eligible for extension. And then there was talk about appointment of a 9th commissioner to be the children's commissioner. All this was very good. And we were told, because a similar problem happened 3 years ago, in 2016, the same thing happened. The term of the commissioners expired in April, but the new batch of commissioners was not appointed till June. And then we were told that this time round, the extensions, the nominations, appointments, whoever, would be seamless. But we are still having a problem like this. Now, my question then is, ladies and gentlemen, what has changed? What is new? All the promises, Pakatan Harapan or whoever, all these good promises made, we're talking about good governance. And if you can't even have your human rights institution being properly recognized and have commissioners appointed, what are then we looking at? Because human rights affects you and I, everyone in the country. No statement has been issued about the deaths of the Orang Asli children up north. Why? Because there are no commissioners. And you can't expect the officer who's running the administration of the SOHACAM to come up with statements like that. So my plea to each and every one of you, if you have somebody to talk to and somebody who is listening, please get on with this. I just do not see why you cannot appoint the commissioners, whoever they may be. You want to go to Parliament and have the PSC do the selection? Fine. You want to have the Prime Minister and the Cabinet to do the selection? Fine, whatever. But get on with it. But this is one of the big challenges that we have. Promises are made, expectations are raised, nothing happens. Now, so the other gripe that I have is the reporting of SOHACAM. You see, every year, SOHACAM prepares a report known as the annual report. And under the Act itself, the mandate is to have this report tabled in Parliament. Over the years, you know what tabling in Parliament means, ladies and gentlemen? Tabling in Parliament means getting it printed and left on the table in Parliament. There's no time for discussion. There's no debate. Right? So all the hard work that's put in, year out in the report goes undebated. So let me just conclude. I know time is catching up with me. Sorry. I just want to say that there are some very important treaties that Malaysia should accede to. We have got 9, but we have acceded to 3 already. But the more important ones have eluded us. ICERT, that's for one. CAT is the Convention Against Torture and against torture, and the death penalty. That comes under CAT, and civil and political rights, ICC, PR. And of course, very recently, ICC was also a point in dispute. Remember this? How Malaysia actually agreed to sign on, and then 2 weeks later, withdrew from that. Another U-turn. ICIT was another U-turn. So why? Why is it that the government is not able, or not willing, or not strong enough to stand by what they have said? I don't know. This is a question which probably you have the answer. Is it because a lack of political will? Is it because the people are not supporting it? Is it because it's just another political tool that's being bandied around? I really don't know. But at the end of it, I'm totally disappointed because we are not supporting ICIT now. We are not a signatory. We are not yet a signatory to CAT. And of course, we don't have the ICC. And very lastly, yes, to review and to repeal the several oppressive laws that we've got. We've got POCA, POTA, SOSMA, Sedition Act, you name it, there's a whole list of it. Now, I'm not saying that for rule of law to prevail in this country, you don't need laws. That's a foolish statement. It's impossible. But what we need laws will be laws which are less draconian, where laws which will respect human rights more, and to ensure that people will have a fair go. And I think there's also a need to enact a new Racial and Religious Hate Crimes Act. What we read and hear in social media, some of the things that people say on race and religion scares the hell out of me. I don't know whether it scares you or not. And I hear friends saying, look, if things don't improve, I want to leave the country. I say, no, that's not the way to do it. Don't leave the country. We need you here. We want to fight to be here and keep on persisting. But you get reactions like that. So this is just to minimize things. And probably it's a good time to have race and religion put on a more a proper foothold, and people will know exactly where they stand. Thank you very much. I hope I've not been too provocative, but if you agree with me, fine. If you don't, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ma. I think following the format of the previous session, let's have Dr. Asmi Shahrul speak first.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Good morning, everybody. It's nice to be back. If not in in a organized conference, I've missed this very much, especially since, according to Prof. Jomo, I'm now a self-serving predator and doomed to being obese. However, okay, so obviously I'm going to talk about the elections and electoral reform because that's all I'm allowed to talk about nowadays. It's very sad. So that's what I'm going to do. Well, okay, with regards to reform, there's two bodies involved here. One is the Election Reform Committee, which was created by the old new Prime Minister. And then there's us, the Election Commission. Right? So obviously there's going to be overlap. So our chairman has decided that, okay, let's leave the broad policy stuff to the ERC, and we will look at only the things which we actually are empowered to do. So if you're going to ask me about, are we going to have proportionate representation, for example, something which Wong Chin Huat is obsessive about, I'm not the person to ask. If you're going to ask me if you're going to have a brand new electoral system, or you know, what form the Election Commission is going to take in the future, that's not what we are dealing with. So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with stuff like delineation, electoral roll, and election process, you know, and electoral offences, because these are the things within our power. But before I go on and talk about what we are going to do or plan to do, let me tell you what we cannot do. So I'm going to start on a negative note. First and foremost, every time I'm at some Hari Raya gathering, people will say, hey, when are you going to change the delineation? Right? That seems to be the biggest thing, right? Delineation. We can't change the delineation, not yet, because the Constitution says it's only done every 8 years. And the last election commission is so efficient. and the last government so quick. They did this last year, just before the general election, right? So that means we can't do it until 2016, unless there's a constitutional amendment, or there's a change in the number of seats. If Parliament decides to add the number of seats, then everything's fair game. Then we start fresh. But again, that's not something that we can control. That's up to Parliament. But the thing is, look, gerrymandering, malapportionment, all this stuff happened. It'll be naive to say that it didn't happen. But having been at Putrajaya, gaining weight, I've discovered that things are a little bit more complicated than I thought. For example, delineation should be a purely mathematical thing. That's what it should be. It should be purely math. Calculate. This is how you divide the electoral boundaries. But one issue that we have, which I think some people don't realize, is the complex federal-state relationship. Okay, let me give you an example. Right? If we take population as our basis, to draw electoral boundaries, then Perlis really should have 5 DUN. Dewan Undangan Negeri Ahli, ADUN. Perlis is so tiny, they have only about 150,000 voters. So if you divide that out to say 30,000 voters per DUN, then they should have 5. Which means that whoever's in that 5, they also have to make up the state government, right? But logically speaking, that's what Perlis deserves. But they have 15 seats, because you can't even form a state government if we follow the actual size of the Perlis in terms of breaking up for seats. Things like Putrajaya. Putrajaya is a weird place because it sits in the middle of Selangor, but it's federal territory. It's a tiny little constituency. But how do you increase the numbers? Unless you merge it with another constituency in KL. All right. If you want to increase it, you can't, because you can't bring people in because they're surrounded by people in Selangor, and you can't broach the state because it's a federal territory. And of course, states are crazily jealous about their seats and they want more. Selangor, rightly so. Every time I see a Selangor MP, that's the first thing they tell me: when are you going to make my constituency smaller? Yeah, like we're Harry Potter and you can just magically do things. Yeah, sure. That'd be nice. Selangor should have more seats because it's a very, very highly populated state. But where are those seats going to come from? Is Pahang going to be willingly given up? Or Sabah, Sarawak, which also have a lot more seats compared to their population? No, to the death they will fight for their seats, even though nothing happens with those seats. But that's what they will do. So these are some of the problems that we will have with regards to delineations. But we are looking at it, we are studying it, we are trying to improve it, but we can't do it now. That's a problem. So what can we do? Well, well, we can form committees, which we have done. But seriously, we're serious about reform. So we have created several committees to look at reforming the areas where we feel that we can. So we have a delineation committee, which I'm chairing, electoral roll, which Azhar, the chairman, created as soon as he was appointed chairperson. We have election offences committee to look at election offences, postal voters, absentee voting. There are issues with all these things, electoral process, and the EC itself. We're looking at ways and means to make ourselves better. So we have created these groups and are in the process of improving ourselves and improving the electoral system. Of course, there's some practical improvements which have occurred, which, there are things which are within our power. Electoral roll, for example, that's within our power. To look through it, clean it up, find all these amazing, miraculous 150-year-old people who are still on the electoral roll, to see whether they're actually alive. Things like that. We can do that. That's within our power to do, and that is something that we are doing. We would actually like to audit our electoral roll as well. So these are things which can be done without any political will, because it just needs us to do it. Practical improvements, the introduction of live streaming using technology, the voters card. If any of you were in the last few by-elections, something about our politicians, they're not very well. They keep passing away. But we have a, but it gives us an opportunity. I mean, oh, that sounds so terrible. They they're found guilty of corruption, etc. But the by-elections are useful in the sense that it gives you a testing ground for new things. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. Forgive me for being insensitive. So, for example, we've introduced a voters card, which gives you exactly where you're supposed to vote, what stream you're supposed to be in, etc. And all these things done to make things easier for the voter. Things that we can do. Things like improving access for the disabled, for the aged. These are things that we can do, and we must continue to do it. And speaking of by-elections, it's quite funny because for the first time I actually see how votes are counted. I must tell you this little story just to wake you up, because I'm sure you're hungry as I am. There was once I saw, spoiled votes, right? Yeah, spoiled votes. So there's this one dude, there were many candidates, and he had put a cross on every single candidate except one, right? And of course, the officer said this is a spoiled vote, and the pachas all agree, yes, it's a spoiled vote. But I was thinking, I don't think it's a spoiled vote, actually. I think he doesn't like all those candidates. That's why he put a cross there, and he left the one that he liked blank, I think in his mind is, saya tak nak. Oh, yang ni saya nak. Yang ni saya tak nak. I think that was going through his mind. But, so these are things that I don't think any amount of education can help, actually. Anyway, so that's some of the things that we've also doing. Greater transparency. I think as an EC, we are more accessible. I think even the election NGOs are recognizing that they can, that we seek them out and they can get in touch with us, and we've asked for opinions, etc., and feedback. Engagements. Yeah? We are actively trying to engage all the stakeholders in order to improve ourselves. Information. We can do this. This is something that can be done where we are less protective about information. The government, Malaysian government, generally speaking, tends to be very, very possessive about information, even when it's not necessarily sensitive, right? So this is something which we can do. Now, I'm quite happy to take questions, but the fact of the matter is, the EC will be making a public statement with regards to our activities in greater detail, and I don't really want to steal the thunder of my colleague Faisal Haziz, who worked so hard on producing this. So I'm more than happy to take questions later on, and if I can, I will answer it. If I can't, I'll just smile wisely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I realize I'm the last speaker before lunch, so I will try to hurry up. Well, I'm going to talk about not on elections or judiciary. I'm not well qualified to talk on those matters, but I'd like to talk about enhancing governance in the public sector. So, what are the lessons we can learn from the past? So, ladies and gentlemen, as you are well aware, after the general election, you all have been exposed to several governance issues afflicting government subsidiary bodies, GLCs, such as Felda, Tabung Haji, MARA, LTAT. And then we also witnessed several changes in the leadership and governance of these bodies, while some more are being transformed. But gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, these weaknesses and lapses in public sector governance has been highlighted by the National Audit Department all these years. for umpteen years, you know. And sometimes, of course, they cause public concern. But the issue here is they seem to be recurring each year. That's a popular question I used to face when I was the Auditor General. Why is it recur? No? Despite the fact that there are lessons that they can learn. To me, it suggests that there is not enough deterrence by public servants to prevent such occurrence. I think that's one of the factors. Because if you look at the report of the Auditor General all these years, they never fail to provide valuable lessons in trying to improve the government delivery system. But very few in the public sector, it seems, are really interested to learn. So they are not interested to learn, so they do not make the same, so that they do not make the same mistake. So it's not unusual for audit reports to be forgotten. Normally after 2 weeks, when they were reported in the media, then people will forget about it. Okay? So if I were to ask you, how many of us can recall what actually happened in PKFZ, the National Feedlot Saga, the KBS issue, the Sabah Water Department scandal? Not many. Not many can recall that now. So I thought these cases would be the ultimate worst case misgovernance happening in our country. And that's came on MDB, believed to be the largest scandal in the world, making Malaysia globally infamous. So enough said about YMDB in view of the pending court cases, yeah? So good governance is nothing new to Malaysia. If we look at the corporate sector, for example, especially relating to public listed companies, we have the Code of Corporate Governance, which has long existed in this country. And then for government linked companies, including those MOF Inc. companies and state government subsidiaries, you'll be surprised that the total of these GLCs, more than 1,000, you know, I was told. And how are they governed? How do they practice good governance in those companies? But my point is that these entities can surely adopt and adapt these corporate good governance guidelines if they are serious in practicing good governance. Also, the federal government has over the years introduced numerous rules and regulations which, such as Treasury instruction, I think Tan Sri Clifford Herbert is very well aware of that, in furtherance of good governance through strengthening internal control. They can provide checks and balances as well as combating fraud and corruption. But having these guidelines and instructions on paper, to me, is not good enough. They must be properly adhered to ensure good performance and results, and more importantly, to avoid fraud and corruption, abuse of power, and misappropriation. And to me, this is a duty of every single government official and manager. There should be no compromise. So, ladies and gentlemen, when these were compromised, what happened? Invariably, the government, whether they are federal government or state government, they will suffer losses. This is the point, you see. The government suffer losses. And, of course, their reputation. While the public, people like you all, understandably become concerned and angry. You take the case of several JLCs generally, despite having board and committees and internal audit, they did not perform well or underperform. and this is to the detriment of the shareholders. But this is so much for the quality and effectiveness of their board and committee members and the quality of their internal audit. The question is, why should this be allowed to happen? Because we are using government money, to run these companies. And some of you may agree that there's a strong corollary between poor results with poor governance and fraud and corruption. But then, who is to blame? Why is it so difficult, I often ask, to adhere to rules and regulations? Is it a case of sheer ignorance? Why are they being overlooked? Or oversight? Or lacking awareness? Or was done on purpose to achieve personal or unofficial objective? Or simply, and this is the point, complying to directive from higher ups to avoid any repercussions. And the funny thing is that most of these people assume that they will never get audited while working in the government. But if they are not lucky, they will be audited and they end up in trouble. Yeah. But that's the risk they are willing to take. Let me illustrate this point by focusing on government procurement. I think now I'm presently involved with investigating some government procurement cases, where for many years there already exist various rules and regulations. Each year the government spend about 60 to 70 billion ringgit on various procurement, or 65% on works, the rest on supplies and services. And government procurement is certainly a big and lucrative market for the private sector. But if you go by the audit reports, we hear of so many weaknesses and shortcomings, sometimes causing heavy losses to the government, whether they are federal government or state government. We heard about unfulfilled objectives, and above all, defying the value for money principles of economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. You might agree that on paper, all government programs and projects have good objectives to meet the aspiration of the rakyat and to strengthen the government machinery. In reality, there are many weaknesses in planning, in implementation, in monitoring that would defy the dasar perbelanjaan berhemat principle so often trumpeted by the government of the day. In fact, instead, the government will always be on the losing end in terms of serious delays, cost escalations, poor design, poor workmanship, wastages, and unnecessary expenditure. As I said earlier, each year the government spends billions on procurement of works, supplies and services. But do governments obtain value for money from them? Not if they fail to manage the risks from such procurement as I just mentioned. In this context, all those involved in the change of government in procurement decision making, from ministers, from controlling officers, senior officers, procurement desk officers, they ought to be constantly reminded of the basic principles of government procurement. Firstly, public accountability. Treasury objective on procurement. Public accountability. Management transparency. Best value for money. Best return for every ringgit spent. Open competition. This is another principle. And fairness, above all. So, in the case of works, for example, we learned from the audit reports, many cases of poor planning in terms of selecting project location, in terms of realistic scope of work vis-a-vis the allocated budget, and a problem with spending money more on aesthetics rather than functionalities, and capturing requirements from technical departments. These are the common weaknesses. Then we have the problem of selection of contractors. A key success factor only later on when the contract has been signed. After the contract has been signed, we realize we made a mistake in not selecting the right contractor. But it is too late, you know. The damage has been done. Never mind the contractor was appointed through direct nego or open tenders, selected tenders, price quotation, etc. But the issue here is, was there a proper due diligence done when doing both the technical and price valuation? If such due diligence is not undertaken, the risk of failure will be much more. Proper due diligence, for example, is to spend time and effort to verify and double check all the information or all the claim provided by the bidders about their technical competency, about their financial strength, about their track record, etc. And in terms of financial strength, I think it's not enough to rely on just 1 year performance. It must be based on several years of audited accounts to obtain a more accurate picture of actual assets and liabilities. Because more often we hear of contractors' financial problems after they had signed a contract. So due diligence also means to cross-check companies with different names but owned by the same individuals so that we can be fair to others. So, in terms of track record, it is also worthwhile to check with the contractor's past clients regarding the contractor's performance. So these are the things that should have been done when you process any procurement. Ladies and gentlemen, you often hear of the pitfalls and negativities of direct nego or direct nego design and build, where despite not having competition and having been given certain concessions like extension of time and variation orders, and sometimes they got advance payments and grant, still there was failure in completing the project on time with no additional cost and good quality. So sometimes you ask or you wonder where all the advance payment or progress payment have gone to. When it comes to purchase equipment, there must be clarity on the specs, on the specification, and there should be adequate consultation with users so that the specs are really the ones they are comfortable to use and not arbitrarily imposed on them. Then, based on the specs, there must be price comparison. For example, by conducting price surveys, including maintenance. Nowadays, I think it is much easier to compare prices through the internet. And I think this is a common sense, and there must be diligence. Why should the government suffer and pay more than necessary? And diligence will save the government from overpricing. Another issue, I hope I'm on time, Mr. Chairman. Another issue I need to raise here is for controlling officers to check whether in signing any procurement contract is not lopsided to the detriment of government interests. There must be adequate provisions to protect government interests covering such things as performance bonds, penalties, arbitration, intellectual property, dispute resolution, etc. And avoid what people say silly provisions like time-based payment instead of performance-based, and also having cap on penalties for delays. Above all, the legal advisor, their own legal advisor must be involved from the beginning, and views of central agencies like the Treasury and the Attorney General Chambers must be sought and reflected in the contract. So what I've said, Mr. Chairman, relate to the technicalities of procurement in the public sector. But what about the risk of fraud and corruption in government procurement, which invariably involve collusion between people inside and outside the department or agency who are the real beneficiaries? Make no mistake that the risks, especially in government procurement, are real and plenty. Indeed, government procurement is susceptible and vulnerable to fraud and corruption in various forms and substance, such as false claims, bribery, kickbacks, money laundering, etc. And sometimes the money transactions involved may astound us. Again, the government is often the loser. And over the years, we hear of so many such cases. It may be difficult to eliminate altogether this risk, but with good governance practice by responsible people, with properly functioning and effective check and balance mechanisms, I think we can effectively reduce the risk of fraud and corruption in government procurement. I think the government ought to rely less on direct nego projects and more on competitive bidding. For example, for those projects which previously the procurement was based on tenders, like in the old times, schools, roads, bridges, hospital, clinics, government buildings, they were done by tenders. They should continue to be procured based on competition. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier on I touched on the recurrence issue, whereby the weaknesses in procurement highlighted by audit seem to be similar year in and year out. I realized that in order to improve on the tidak apa perception, there must be effective follow-up on the audit report, not only in terms of corrective action in adhering to the rules and procedures, but also to serve as deterrence to others in terms of punitive action against the government people, whether they are still serving or they are retired, found liable to the fraud and corruption as well as blatant negligence. I believe punitive action can and must be taken against wrongdoers through the disciplinary and legal action under the relevant laws. And I think this is important in enhancing governance in the public sector, including our GLCs. As such, it was a good move to empower the National Audit Department about a few years ago to directly undertake the follow-up action on their report, on the AG's report, because the auditors were the ones conducting the independent reality check. They know what happened. And I would like to inform you that the result in terms of punitive action were very encouraging indeed. So, Mr. Chairman, in summary, I would say that from lessons of the report, of the AG report, enhancing governance in the public sector mostly require going back to basics. You go back to basics because we have practiced this many years ago. By following the book and strictly where the bersih, cekap and amanah principle, I call it the BCA principle, is still relevant, and it must be a cardinal principle upon which we want to move the country forward. especially with regard to public finance. Thank you very much.
I'm sure the thoughts have been founded on years of experience and expertise, and for me it is a privilege to listen to them. So we will have questions in a little while, but before that, I would like you to join me in showing some appreciation for the thoughts that they have shared with us. We have time for a few questions.
Yes, we have time for a few questions.
Let me suggest the following. I think as you may wish to address questions to specific speakers, or you may just leave it on our side. I think I should leave the speakers to answer as they please.
Good afternoon, I'm Adriana. I'm a representative from the National House Buyers Association. My question is specific to Dato' Ma Weng Kwai. I noticed from your presentation just now that it was very good, one of which is that you were touching on infringement on human rights, and you were also explaining that steps which I suppose has already been taken to introduce human rights training to the police force. Would the government be also looking at extending such training, for example, to the immigration department? Because taking an example from when I was in the government, for anti-trafficking in persons, I think the immigration personnel, they had some difficulties in differentiating between traffic victim and party, because it's two different scope of people. So if the government could also look into having some human rights training for them, I think it will assist them in terms of implementation, treatment, the different segments of, because I think initially when ATIP came about, the immigration department looked at it as party as a whole. They didn't understand that for traffic victims, whether they consented to it or whatever not, it's different from pendatang asing tapi izin. Secondly, just small suggestion, you were expressing your concern as to hate speech, hate crime just now, and how it frightened you or scared you off. Yes, I'm one of those who are also taken aback by the extent that hate speech or hate mentality has been growing in the country. Small suggestion, maybe how we can go to the root cause is it's change of a cultural mindset, the education system, start from young, basically. I mean, personally, I admire what the current education minister has been doing, taking steps to improve the quality of the education. But it's not just a matter of learning the hardcore subjects. Also, I suppose we need to change how we look at each other despite our differences. I went to primary school in the 1980s. I had friends, classmates from various races, various religion, 80s even. But I think nowadays my nephews, they have only one certain ethnic group in their school. So, thank you.
Thank you, Adriana, for that, for those two questions. Yes, quite apart from having programs with the police on human rights, we also have programs for immigration officers, prison officers, in fact all the major stakeholders in people who are responsible for enforcement of the various laws. And very often Sohakam will have either a roundtable discussion or programs and to see what exactly are the problems that are affecting the enforcement agencies. And besides that, Sohakam officers make regular visits to the various centers. For example, immigration centers from north to south, and we visit all the detention centers and to find out what exactly is the lack of facilities and what other problems they have. And even, for example, the police lockup. There are some horrendous stories about police lockups where these are old buildings, dilapidated buildings, and it's really not fit for habitation, but they're still being used. And when it comes to prisons, do you know that there's still the bucket system being used in some prisons? You may not know what a bucket system is. The older, my older colleagues, friends here will know. Yeah, the bucket system, the guys that come in the middle of the night. Now this bucket system is still being used in one or two of the prisons, and we have been asking Ministry of Home Affairs, approaching them and say, please allow or allocate funds for reforms in this area. Then, of course, when it comes to immigration, for example, to have human rights programs for them, it's definitely very important. And then, because they are dealing with people coming in and out of the country, and then you have big issues like Wang Kelian. In fact, when Wang Kelian first was exposed, Suhakam did go and make what they call field studies and investigations, so on. So much so that there was a report that was already prepared by Suhakam, and when the RCI started their investigations recently, that report was submitted and given to them. So that was a starting point, at least. Yeah. The other, of course, as far as hate speech is concerned, well, I think it really goes down, drill down to the ground level, what we call it, grassroots level, and it's all a matter of getting on with our neighbors, getting on with our friends. You're absolutely right. I mean, you went to school in the 80s, I went to school in the 60s, or 50s rather, and there's absolutely no concern about who is sitting next to you, who is doing what, and absolutely great friendship throughout. And this friendship has lasted until today, and we're going to celebrate our 55th anniversary since leaving Form 5. I mean, some of you might be even more senior than I am, but these are great moments because that friendship has lasted, and there's no such thing of speaking ill and speaking evil of one group against the other. But this is something which has taken a different turn, and reading, following social media, it is scary. People, the words are being used, and yeah, and it just whips up a lot of emotions. Thank you. A very short and almost pedantic question. When it comes to marking the ballot paper, why is it a cross and not a tick? Because a tick in school means you pass. Cross is something you don't want. But here you don't want somebody, but you have to, I mean, you want somebody, but you put a cross against his name. Is that?
No. Actually, all right. It's a cross. I don't know why it's a cross. I don't know why it's not a tick. But, and please, don't take this as a reason to go and do silly things. But actually, any sort of mark will be accepted, as long as it's clear. So it could be a tick. I'm not asking you to go and tick. Alright, but it can be a tick, it can be a cross, as long as it's not a letter or a word. There are rules. I mean, the safest thing was to make a cross, but the thing is, here's another funny thing. A lot of the older dudes, sorry, because they put their finger in the ink, right? They put their print in the paper. They go and then they'll I want this person, and they'll put their fingerprint or in the box rather than a cross. And that's still accepted. There are guidelines, as long as it's marked, the person has done their job, and it's quite flexible. And of course, the pachas are there to make sure that everything's above board. So yeah, if you really want to, go ahead and tick.
Good to know. We'll go Air Asia X and not Nike.
Well, thank you very much for a very, I would think, exhilarating session. And I think I'm more in tune with what's happening in the country because of this. Okay, so now I would like to ask for Dr. Cheong to stay on the stage to give the token of appreciation to our